Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm just sitting here this afternoon doing some work outside in my grill Zebo. And I was just, thinking about a conversation that me and my wife had earlier today about, just an article that I saw in the Herald about the island of Cull, and how it looks like they were going to be losing like one of their only revenue streams, which I think was like a co-op or a trust or something. And upon losing that, the fear is that like the island would kind of just die with like its residency and things like that. And one of like the major things that themes was that there was like a lack of like youth and like younger people living on the island, that would have kept it like alive and vibrant and things like that. And there, there's obviously a general fear that that's going to go away with no revenue stream. And so I was just it got me thinking about like what's happened with Armadale and you know and other places in Scotland like Loch Lomond with the development with the Flamingo Land and like rumors of like Loch Ness and that being sold as well. I'm just kind of wondering like what like Scottish people feel like the end game looks like here if like the trend continues of like land and historical places and heritage sites being sold off to private buyers. Obviously there's a benefit to somebody who can buy a property or a historical site or heritage site and like do the right thing with it and keep it going and keep it as an interest to the public, and like in the case of Armadale, like for the clan and the community, as a place that can be like an employer, and ultimately like an economic driver, and then a heritage site for people all over the world. But I guess the disturbing thing is like being from the United States and seeing like what the consequences are of like the commercialization and like the general greed for more land and resources. Like I've seen it quite a bit, like what that looks like, working on Indian reservations in North Dakota, Montana, South Dakota, and then also in other places too, like living in the St. Louis area and looking at, like places like East St. Louis, and North St. Louis, where there was a lot of industry, like the resources were people, and then those things went away once that was all taken care of and once that was dried up, and like what's left after that. And I guess like one of my general fears is like in seeing what the consequences of an end game like that are, I just I just don't want it to happen to Scotland and like to places like Skye, Armadale, Slate, that have so much meaning to so many people. I just seeing what can happen at like at some of the most disturbing levels, it makes you think that do people in Scotland really fully understand like what would happen if the majority of those places like went away, or if they went to private hands and they weren't maintained for like heritage uses for people to appreciate, love, and go back to and celebrate. Like what if those places were sold and just used for private use, for commercial property, for resources and things like that. And what do people in Scotland think that looks like if that all goes away? Like Scotland to me is a place where people very much are connected to the land. Like they feel like they're very much a part of these places because their family lived there, they grew up there, they their ancestors came from there, and they're descendants of people who've been there for, in some cases, hundreds and hundreds of years. Like part of like the magic to me with a place like Scotland is obviously there's like the scenic beauty and this natural beauty that's there. And like Ranald the Elder once said to me, well, Skye isn't going anywhere, you can always go back. Oh, and that's true. I mean, there's always going to be mountains, there's always going to be open, beautiful places, but what does that feel like without the people and the stories and the traditions? What if that goes away? Like, what if those stories don't continue to be told by the people who are from there and who live there? Like, I guess the thing is, like, you can always say a place is going to be there, of course. Like, yeah, like my house will be here to a certain degree for another, whatever many years, and the ground it's on is going to be here for however many years. But like, without the people to live there to tell the story of it, what does it mean? It's just a thing. And like, ultimately, like the special places that are in Scotland are special because of the people that made it that way. Like through love, triumph, tragedy, and all of that. And I consider Scots, especially like native Scots and Gaels and people from like, places where there were clearances, like they're very much akin to like Native Americans in the United States, or disaffected communities where they were taken advantage of, and their places were ultimately driven into a certain state of like this is what we're doing with your land, you don't have any choice with it, right? And I think about like those connections, and they're very, very similar in a lot of ways. Like there was people weren't allowed to wear tartans, people weren't allowed to do certain ceremonies or dances here and even there, and like it's just like the parallels are just too many to count. And when I look at Armidale, and I know that this has probably been happening for a very long time with many places there, but just thinking about like what that means, as if this were to progress, like if Loch Lomond were to get the resort and have it be plowed over and all of that stuff, and like have it turn into like this place where like half the bank is gone and you just have a place where people can stay and tourists can do whatever they do, what's lost there, right? Is there something like spirit and soul taken away from these places? Like with Armidale, like one hopes that the owner is going to do the right thing and make it keep it to be a special place, and keep it as a place that can be an economic tool for the community. But what if they didn't? What would it look like if that didn't happen? Right? I feel like it would be a very sad place. Without the heart of the place where the people could go and they could feel that connection. And like I'm not from Slade, and I will never pretend to be. But like I don't know how they would feel if that just went away and just was cut off, like 20,000 acres, of their land. Like what if that was just gone, and not for their use, not for the people that have worked it forever, and things like that. And then you think about like Kingsburg House up north, like, well, that wasn't just like a huge tourist attraction. It had a tail, it had a soul, it had a heart, like even though it wasn't being used, and even though it was kind of a ruined house, like it didn't mean that there wasn't something significant there. And like when it was sold and people were shocked, the reason that people were shocked is because there is feeling there, and that's just never taken into account with some of these people. And you wonder, like, if that's the case with the people who are selling these things off, what does it look like if more and more places in Scotland end up doing that? And that's what happens to it. So I just had some thoughts on that, because we had talked about it today with my wife, and like we had read the article in the Herald, and I just thought, like, the reason that we keep fighting, and the reason why I definitely am motivated to continue like the preservation cause and for Scotland and for these special places, is that I don't want to see it end up where it's just a place that's full of attractions. I want it to have its heart, I want it to have its soul, I want it to have its people that are there, they're doing things that are honest to them and true to them, because that's what makes it special, right? It's the land and the beauty and the people that have the stories that make it what it is. And I don't want to see it have an end game. I don't want it to see the results of what I see here around me sometimes and in certain places. I don't want that to happen. So just some thoughts on a Sunday. Let me know what you think. And thank you all for taking a chance and clicking on this video.